Hi, everybody. Today's October 3rd, 2021, and my name is Jay Johnson. Here we are at the church at Royal. Today we're going to be talking about a story I'm sure most of you have heard before, and it's found in Exodus chapter 3. It's about our older brother Moses. Remember Moses? This is the story where he's called. We're going to be talking about that today. Obviously, all the stories were unfolding. We're going to be going very quickly through the Old Testament, number of characters. I'm asking that you consider, if you were walking alongside these guys and these ladies, what would be going through your mind? You're probably thinking, I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to touch that. There's no way I'd ever do that. But you know what? There is a way you do that. We're going to share with you right now a couple of things about Moses. I'm going to read this passage, and I think you're going to see something that's affirming, encouraging, and kind of enlightening. It will be enlightening because, remember, Moses, he was, well, in a way, he was kind of like us because he was a privileged individual. He'd been gifted with, obviously, he went through a lot of difficult times as a boy, but he really wasn't even aware how he was living his life basically he was abandoned by his parents we know the story. I won't go all through that, but he comes to the point where later in life, he's grown, he's an adult, and he comes to the grave and very shocking realization that he's a child of slaves, and how he responds to that. So I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind doing this. If you at home, just hit the pause button on this. I want you to get your Bibles and get Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. I'm going to read part of this passage to you, and obviously you can see the things that go before and afterwards. I'd like you to take a look at this passage because it's a very powerful thing. I'm going to read several of these things and I know you've heard these before, but there's some affirmations here I think would be especially helpful for us today. Today, because the focus is the call. The call is to go. Wherever it is the Lord wants you to go, He wants you to go someplace. And it could be maybe just down the street. It could be just across the street to your neighbor. It could be, well, let's see. If you please join with me, this is, I'll read and you follow along. This is from Exodus chapter 3, beginning of verse 1. It talks about Moses. He's come out of Egypt. He's come out. He knows he's had to escape. He's been in Egypt for some time. He's been there. He was there. He rescued Zipporah, who's the daughter of his father-in-law, Jethro, comes to be his father-in-law. And he's lived there, and now he's been there for some years, probably about 40 years. So he's probably about 80 when this happens. Now, I know some of you will feel a little bit skittish about, so how can they possibly live that long? 80, 90 to 120 years? That's not possible. I'm not going to discuss that issue now. Suffice it to say, this is accurate stuff. So follow along as I read. Now, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Get that? Priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, now how do we know that Moses thought this? It says, Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. How do we know Moses thought that? Because Moses is writing this down. He's revealing to all of us the process. Now, I say that to you because many of you are going, how can this possibly be? Because we think those things. We have doubts. We're not sure, so we go to investigate. So here's what happened. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God said to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, here I am. And he says in verse 5, do not come any closer. God said, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. What does that mean? Have you ever walked on holy ground? Now, I'm not saying that God pronounces that this is holy ground, this is a holy space that you need to be careful where you walk. But I am saying that wherever God goes, wherever his presence goes, there is a pervading sense of the holiness that goes where he is. And people can't experience that. There's what it says. Take off your sandals, for this place is holy ground. Then he said to him, this is really key. Then he said to him, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, Moses wasn't going to actually see the face of God, but he was in the presence of God. God was around there. Now, why did God say that? Now, I mention this because I believe that in God's sovereignty, he wants us to know all this background that's available to Moses. He's got that. And I believe that most of us that are hearing this video right now have this awareness of that background, but God always refreshes us with that by repeating that. He says, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He repeats that several times. Why? Because he wants that to be a continual memory that we carry with us. It says, at this, Moses hid his face, and he looked at the ground, and the Lord said, listen to what this said. This is really a powerful comment. He says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. It says, I've seen their misery. And the same verse it says, I have heard their cries from the slave drivers. I've heard their cries. I am concerned about their suffering. I have come down to rescue them and to bring them into my promised land. And then he says this, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. He comes to a recognition of this. Now, let me stop here for just a second. They've been there for 400 years. They've been slaves for that long. Why now? Does God simply not care? So he sort of wakes up from this drowsiness and he decides, oh, now I'm going to go? No, I believe it's because it got to the point where they were desperate. God says numerous times in the Old Testament, all these things transpired, all these difficulties came. Why didn't you call on me? And so I'll have to ask the same of all of us. When difficulties happen, why do we not call on God more often? Likely because we think, I can handle this myself. I've heard many, many, many people, when a situation is explained to them, how difficult something is, where things have gone wrong, the first comment will be, I know, I know. And my thought is, you have no idea. You can say, I know, I know. And what that means is it reaches your level of intellect where you can perceive that it's happening. But you don't perceive why it's happening. People don't perceive that. The word know, there's several meanings for the word know. One is that you can see it and you can recognize it for a situation that it is. But there's another level to knowing. And God uses that second level a lot. It means to experience it. There's a great word that we study from the Old Testament. When it says he knows something, when we know something, we come to the realization of its fateful or delighted impact on us. People can see how difficult it is, but there's always this idea in their background, I can handle that. I can persevere a little bit longer, and I can handle that. Finally, it comes to the point where they're crying out because now they can't handle it. It's at that point where God says in verse 9, And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. I believe that's more than just the physical labor. I believe that's also an attack upon their mental status. actually upon their attitudes about their gods. You see, they've been living among these Egyptian gods for so long, they began to think and to receive and to integrate all of those lies into their lives, when their lives had for generations before been looking truly at the soul, at the one true God. It says this, verse 10, so now I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. What? Moses goes, what are you talking about? And indeed, because Moses himself, for at least 40 years now, has seen the difficulties that his people, the Israelites, are going through. But now, he's been avoiding that. He's stepped away from that. He's been isolated that from 40 years. He's living not a cushy life, the life of a sheep herder, on some barren places, barren rocks. But it's pretty quiet. He's safe. He's content. He's got his wife. He's got several children. He's in a comfortable place. He's feeling okay. Now what happens? There's this double challenge. Here's the challenge. This double challenge is that he recognizes, God has explained to Moses, this difficulty has happened and it's going to be resolved. And I'm sure that as Moses hears that, he's going, yeah, it's about time this happened. This is a good thing. We don't know how long it took God to explain these things. It could have been just the time it took me to read this. Or it could have evolved over maybe a lengthy conversation that God was revealing himself. We don't know if he was sitting there looking in a place. It could be that, this is something that I've considered. Was he sitting there on some lone point? Well, all of a sudden the Spirit of God sort of goes around, communicates to him, says things in surprising ways, and as God speaks these words, he causes Moses to have those memories of what it was like back in Egypt when he was there. Remember, this has been decades before. Is Moses recalling these things? Is this sort of a recall, a challenging renewal of his thoughts from before? And if it is, he remembers all those things, and he's probably very grateful that God says he's going to do these things. You notice he says, I've seen their misery. I have heard their cries. I am concerned about their sufferings, and I will come down to resurrect them and to bring them out of this land. It's a lot of positive recognition and responses on God's part. And then he says these words. He says, so now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Pretty hard stuff for a guy that's been sitting in the backcountry for 40 years. But this is what Moses says. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring these Israelites out of Egypt? This is for you. This is written about Moses. Moses is sharing this. I'm sharing this with you because I believe you're not Moses, but you are whoever you are, fill in the name. Does God have a plan for you? Of course he does. Does he want you to go to Egypt? Maybe. I vividly remember back some years ago, we were at a pancake supper at the church where I was at in Idaho, St. John's Lutheran in American Falls, Idaho. I vividly remember. We had a discussion one night. There was a missionary that was visiting there, and the guy had been to Africa. And somebody asked me, they said, would you ever think about going to Africa, Jay? And I said, no way. No way would I ever want to go to Africa. That was just not on my radar. No desire, not an inkling of that came into my being. But you know what? Within 6 months, I was planning to go to Africa. The Lord lays that on our hearts. He really does. He lays that on our hearts because he has a plan for us. Did I expect it? No. And I know for sure, every single one of you that's listening right now, every single one of you has come to various experiences in your life. You think, Why did I do that? I know why you did it. Because the Lord, some way, by some means, by some plan of his, he caused something to enter into your mind, into your perception, and the Lord gradually causes you to turn and say, that's beginning to appeal to me. And he will draw you to himself. And he will draw you to the place where he will want you to go. And then he said, and then the Lord says this in verse 12. He said, Moses kind of grumbles and complains, but God says, and God said, I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain, the same mountain where he went up. We call it Mount Sinai. Interesting, isn't it? Why would God bring Moses back to the same place that he would receive this instruction? Well, I think it's kind of an interesting thought, and we like to reminisce, don't we? We like to remember the places where we've been, the things that, the good things, the turning points where we suddenly we came to this awareness what the big change in life was going to be. I know couples when they get married, years later they'll go back to the place where they had their rendezvous, where he proposed, and they go, yeah, wasn't that great then? I believe that God will bring them back as an affirmation to say, remember when you were here, and then you went there, and now we're back here to visit, and you remember, Moses, what happened? We do that. I know of guys. Well, let's look at the D-Day, the hitting the beaches in Normandy on June 6, 1944. How many of those soldiers that were there that landed on the beaches at Normandy went back there years and years and years and years later? They went back for 75 years. Why? Because they wanted to remember what they'd gone through. Because that was a step that they took. Now, here's what I'm proposing to you. I believe there's a place that God wants you to go. I don't know where it's at. Take a look at the map right here. This map right here, this is where, this is this little chunk of territory. This is a small chunk of territory. Moses walked right here. It was up from here up to here. I mean, it's peanuts. If you had a car on the road today, you could travel that in probably 5-6 hours. You'd be there. But he didn't have that. Now take a look at this. Where's God asking you to go? Maybe, let's just take a look. Take a look at this right here. This is in the United States. This is where we're at. We live right here. Small place. Really small place. God may not be asking you to go very far at all. He may not at all. He may just want you to settle down to be right where you're at right now for the rest of your life, and that's fine. But you know what? You can have an impact over the nation and over the world. Now I say this, all this territory here, all this territory, all that you see is at your fingertips. And your prayers can be such that they will touch the rest of the world. Last week it was Mission Sunday. We showed you all the flags from the various countries in the world. You're not going to go there. But you know what? I firmly believe that your prayers make a huge difference for people there. I'll just put in this one comment about a prayer request. You know, many of those people in Afghanistan, very difficult situation. Many of you know all the history, the bits and pieces that have come into the media over the last several weeks. Do you know that your prayers are still touching the lives of many, many people? It's true. You may be praying for the kids right here in this town or in various towns around, or similar situations with people in nursing homes. But your prayers are very powerful. And I say this because Moses himself was afraid to go. But God promised him that he would be with him. I want to leave you with these couple of thoughts. It says, you will come back on this, you will worship God on this mountain. And then Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Do you hear that? I am has sent me to you. That's what he's called. And then he says this phrase again. You just heard this a few minutes ago. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, he is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Do you see he repeats that phrase? He again recognizes and reminds people of who he is. And all those Israelites, once they hear that, it settles on their minds and on their hearts, which has been ingrained in their hearts for generations, probably dozens of generations. No, maybe a dozen generations. The generations will remember, and they will take that to heart, and God will cause that to be stirred in them. I'm simply saying to this, you, my friends, whether you're here in this country or elsewhere, we know these things to be true. When we allow that to inform our hearts and our decisions, not some whimsical understanding, but when you take time, now remember this, Moses spent a lot of time where? In the desert, by himself. And you, brothers and sisters, when you take that time to be by yourself and in fervent prayer, you ask what it is the Lord would have you do, then he will so guide and direct your thinking, your process, and you will follow with your own steps. He will give you that desire, and the promise will be held to you that he will lead you because he will be with you. The last passage we're going to be having talks about, later in the New Testament, Jesus is talking about who he is, and he made the declaration. He said, I saw Abraham, and he rejoiced to see who I am. He rejoiced at my day. And they said, you're not even 30 years old. How can you possibly how can you possibly have known Abraham? And Jesus said these words. This is what he says. Catch this phrase. He said, Abraham delighted to see me, and before Abraham was, I am. Immediately, the leaders of the community picked up stones and they pursued him because they said it was blasphemous, because he, Jesus, used the name I am to refer to himself. That must have sent chills down their back to think that this man was so audacious to use God's name to refer to himself. But what about his disciples? When they heard that, again, they probably had chills going down their back, but with a sense of increased confidence in what Jesus can and wants to do for them, and likewise with us. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. Next week we're going to have a discussion. We're going to have a discussion about what it means for the tougher journey. We're going to be talking about, while they're in the midst of this journey, going through the desert, what's that going to be like? I've got a great story from American history I think will very much impress you and will give you some new ways of thinking about that. Blessings to you. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us. Bless you. Take care. Bye now.